Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to Reacteria. Today, we're going to be taking a look at a clip from Phil Robertson, one of the hosts of the popular TV show Duck Dynasty, as he describes intelligent design to the atheist crowd. Now, originally, I considered not responding to this video, because it is just addressed to atheists, and while I very much am one, that's not exactly what I'm trying to do with this series. Criticisms of the gods on offer have come up from time to time, but I have whole other shows that I host for that. This series is supposed to predominantly be just about science, and using these pseudoscience videos to teach real science lessons. But after looking at a little bit of this video, I see that Phil actually does talk about science quite a bit, and you may be surprised to see that there's actually a few things that we kind of agree on at the beginning, so I think it'd be a good thing to talk about. But before we get there, I gotta thank my patrons on Patreon and the sponsor of today's video, Blinkist. Blinkist is an app that summarizes nonfiction books into bite-sized segments so that you can hear all the main points of the text in just 15 minutes. Now, Blinkist is not a way to replace reading. Instead, it's just a handy tool to help you get the gist of a book when you don't have the time to read the whole thing. And more importantly, it's a great way to see if you actually like a book before you commit the time and energy to actually sitting down and reading it. It's sort of like when your friend wants to talk about some obscure movie that they like, so you just read the synopsis online so that you can talk about it and maybe even see if you want to watch it yourself. It saves time, it speeds up learning, and you can get a 7-day free trial and 25% off Blinkist annual premium by using my promo link in the description or by scanning the QR code on the screen. With over 6,500 books and podcasts in their library, with topics ranging from psychology to politics to biography to science to economics and beyond, there are a ton of topics to explore and new ideas to discover. Just be sure to check out A Brief History of Time by Stephen Hawking. It's one that I read as a teenager, and it still blows my mind to this day. And be sure to check out Spaces, a new feature that allows you to create a space with friends or family where you can add, share, and recommend titles from the Blinkist library all in one place. So head on over to Blinkist.com/ValkaiLabs to get a 7-day free trial plus 25% off Blinkist Premium. Thanks so much to Blinkist for sponsoring this video. Now let's hear Phil's challenge to the atheists.
And the trip you take once a year, we all take it.
Yep.
The trip you take is 584 million miles before you get back around to where you started.
And you say you never travel.
We all are big-time travelers.
We're already off to a great start. Thinking about just how fast and how far the Earth moves at any given moment is immensely cool.
So will we wound up in the same place we started?
Yep.
Now that part isn't true. We are orbiting the sun, but we never actually end up back where we started because the sun is also moving around through the Milky Way galaxy, and the Milky Way galaxy is also moving through space. So we're doing this, and this, and this, and this all at the same time. That's not a major criticism of him. It's just so much cooler than what he's saying, and what he's saying is already pretty cool.
And the whole thing is moving away, and we're traveling at 60,000 miles an hour.
Moving away from what?
Moving away from going out across the cosmos. You're spreading like this.
Those numbers are a bit off as well. I think he's talking about the motion of the Milky Way galaxy through space. That's happening at about 1.3 million miles per hour. If, however, he's talking about the orbit of our solar system around the Milky Way, that's happening at about 514,000 miles per hour. So the numbers he just gave there don't make any sense. But what he's talking about is still monumentally, astronomically cool. So these are all just little nitpicky things, no major criticisms. I would have no problem having a conversation with this man so far.
At the same time, all this traveling is going on at an incredible speed because the key to it, my point is, you don't even have a sensation of moving.
It feels like we're just perfectly still right now.
Look, this.
Yeah, that's because you only feel motion when your velocity changes. It's why you don't feel like you're moving when you're driving in a car unless you hit the gas and get pressed back or hit the brakes and lurch forward. Now, I'm a biologist, not a physicist, but I did have to take a couple of physics classes in my undergrad. I remember a little bit of the terminology. There's speed, which is just the rate at which you are moving. Then there's velocity, which is that motion in one particular direction. And then there's acceleration, which is any change in that velocity. So you can accelerate or decelerate, and that's what we usually call speeding up or slowing down. That's when you actually feel the motion. By the way, it's a super common misconception to conflate the words deceleration and negative acceleration. but those aren't necessarily the same thing. Deceleration necessarily results in a reduction in speed, whereas negative acceleration just means acceleration in the negative direction of whatever coordinate system you're using. So, for example, if I were to plot the motion of a car on an XY plane, having it slow down while moving to the right would be both deceleration and negative acceleration, because it is slowing down and the acceleration is in the negative direction. However, if it were speeding up while moving to the left, that wouldn't be deceleration because it is speeding up, but it would still be negative acceleration because the acceleration is still in the negative direction. The point is, what Phil's talking about here is inertia, the tendency of an object to stay at rest or in motion unless acted on by another force. And because everything that has mass also has inertia, you can get some really, really cool effects by playing with acceleration. For example, if you ever want to see something really interesting and also look crazy at the same time, go get yourself a scale, like the kind that you would weigh yourself on, and take it into an elevator. As the elevator starts to accelerate downward, you will weigh less. And then as the elevator hits a constant speed, your weight will normalize. Then as the elevator starts to slow down, you'll weigh more until you come to a complete stop with the elevator and your weight stabilizes again. Inertia is something that I could talk about for literal hours, but again, I'm not a physicist and that's not the point of this video, so let's get back to this clip.
This is
Hold
not
up a
moving.
piece of paper.
And we're not moving. Look, and watch. Watch gravity. That's gravity.
Paper falls to
You
the
said
table.
without that, you got problems.
Well, we'd be spinning off.
It would sling you in every direction.
Yeah, dude! Gravity's dope! It's a function of the shape of the universe. It's the natural result of the curvature of space-time. It's something that can trap light and dilate time just to make sure that the rules of the universe are the same no matter how fast you're going or where you're standing. Once you start thinking about it, it's something that will never ever stop blowing your mind.
I only bring that up for my atheistic friends and the agnostics of the world. That, any way you want to slice it,
Man,
is incredible
I agree.
design.
And just like that, I disagree.
right?
It's incredible. You're like, good night. Now look, and the earth itself, watch. It's got about a 23.439281 degrees. It's like this.
It's tilted
It's tilted slightly,
as it's spinning.
roughly a 24 degrees. You say, what if that was just straight up and down?
No good.
We're dead. We're dead. All of us are dead.
Okay, so that's not true, and this is where the video starts to go downhill quickly. The angle of the tilt of the Earth, or what we call its obliquity, is constantly changing. It only moves a couple of inches a year, so it's not enough for us to see within our own lifetimes, but the Earth is like a spinning top that's rotating around one axis, but it's constantly wobbling like this, which is the obliquity, and like this, which is what we call precession. Over very long periods of time, changes in the obliquity of the Earth's tilt are what cause changes to the severity of the seasons. Because remember, the tilt of the Earth is what causes those seasonal changes. Because the Earth is tilted at different positions around the sun, different amounts of sunlight are hitting different parts of the Earth's surface. This is why the days get shorter or longer as we move around the sun, and this is why when it's summertime in the northern hemisphere, it's wintertime in the southern hemisphere. An easy way to remember this is that the seasons are all about the length of days and the angle of rays. All that is to say, if the Earth were straight up and down with no axial tilt and an obliquity of 0 degrees, all that would mean is that the day and night would be the same length all the time, and there would be no seasons. Life would still be here.
You're like, well, it seems like this thing, we're just to be here is one of the most dangerous things you could ever put together. The key to it is that took, to all my atheistic friends, we love y'all, but that took design to make that happen. Any way you want to slice it.
So this is just a classic fine-tuning argument, that the Earth is set up so perfectly for life like ours that there must be some sort of intentionality behind this precise arrangement. Usually claims like this are also accompanied with other assertions, like that if the Earth were just a little bit closer or a little bit further from the sun by just a few miles or even just a few inches, that it would wipe out all life. even though that also isn't true, and we get several millions of miles closer to and farther from the sun as we orbit it every year. And that's exactly the kind of argument that Phil made just a minute ago, that the angle of the Earth is so perfect for life like ours, and if it were just a little bit different, we'd all be dead, when that simply isn't the case at all. But in all fairness to Phil's point, the vast, vast majority of the universe is, at the very best, indifferent to life. And more often than not, it's actively hostile to life. And when you take that at face value, it can make the Earth feel like this little island paradise amidst a sea of death that must have been perfectly set up just for us. But if you want to see why that argument really doesn't hold up, you can take into account the fact that if you just think about the Earth and forget about space entirely, you could do the exact same thing and it still wouldn't make any sense. Around 70% of the surface of this planet is covered in water. That leaves just 30% of the Earth for us. And of that, a huge amount of it is covered in mountains or deserts. So there's only about maybe 15% that we could actually live on. And there's also the issue of us needing water to live. And even though 70% of the planet is covered in water, 97% of that is salt water. So that only leaves 3% of the water available for us to be able to drink. And most of that is trapped in glaciers and ice caps and permafrost or buried deep underground. So overall, less than 1% of the water on this planet is drinkable and available to us. So considering just how little land there is to live on and just how little water there is to drink, a child born on a patch of arable land next to a potable stream might reasonably assume that that little piece of earth was perfectly designed just for them. But that wouldn't be the case. If the land didn't look like that, their parents probably wouldn't have moved there and chosen to have children. And the same is true when you scale that up to the whole planet. If the planet had been different, we would have evolved differently, and we probably would have thought that those conditions were perfect for us. Or we wouldn't have evolved at all, so we wouldn't be thinking anything. The point is, what Phil is doing here is putting humans at the center of the cosmic narrative, and there's simply no reason to do that.
Now from there, you pick up a Bible, which a lot of you don't do. I recommend you pick up a Bible if you're an agnostic or an atheist, and just think about these things.
Or if you know one.
Yeah.
I promise you, I have picked up and read the Bible. My Bible is dripping with notes and highlighter marks, as are the Bibles of most of the atheists that I know. In fact, many of them were once religious, and it was their study of the Bible that caused them to lose their faith and become atheists themselves. Once they discovered all of the scientific inaccuracies, logical inconsistencies, and moral atrocities contained within this book, they simply couldn't make excuses for them anymore. And once the curtain was lifted and they looked behind it, they found no God worth believing in. So I think that you, Phil, should read your Bible as well. You may not like what you find.
First sentence, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And then I gave you just an explanation of what the earth is doing in lieu of the sun being where it is, 93 million miles away. You're like, boy, that took precise design, or it's chaos and you're dead in a heartbeat.
Like I said at the beginning, I do whole shows where I talk about atheism, and where I have debates and discussions with religious people. And every so often, someone will do what Phil just did and point to the Bible as an explanation for something. And what they don't understand when they do that is that the Bible is not authoritative to me. I have no reason to believe that it's true or accurate or really even all that useful. So if you're a religious person watching this, please understand I'm not being condescending here. But what Phil just did, by pointing to the Bible and saying, see, it says right here, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, is exactly like if I were to come up to you with a copy of The Lord of the Rings and start talking about how the universe was created by the music of the Ainur. It shouldn't mean anything to you. Before you try to tell me what's in the book, you first need to convince me that the book is true and worth hearing about. But if the book you're talking about happens to include talking snakes and donkeys, a global flood, and plants existing on Earth before the sun existed, you're going to have a really hard time getting me to take you seriously.
You say, what about Mars, and what about Jupiter and Venus on both sides of us, and Mars? You say, what about these planets? They've researched them, Al,
Mm-hmm.
and guess where they found any life? Guess where life is, what they found? Guess where?
Just where we are?
Just where we are.
Yeah.
They've sent rovers to Mars, drove around, looked around. They said, You said, did they find a trace of a living organism? None. Zero. They found nothing. Just Earth. I think it's worthy of note.
So there's three important things to talk about here. First of all, as I alluded to before, of course, the Earth is the only place that we know of that has life, because the Earth is the only planet that we know of that has the right conditions to harbor life. There are hundreds of millions of potentially habitable planets out there, but the Earth is the only one that we know for sure is habitable. Now, people in Phil's position would hear that and say, yeah, the Earth is the only place that we know of that harbors life because it's the only place that was designed to harbor life. But that's like looking at a glass of water and assuming that the glass was specially designed to hold that particular shape of water, rather than the more obvious truth that the water was poured into the glass and took whatever shape the glass was. Again, the conditions of Earth weren't fine-tuned to allow life to survive. Life evolved in order to survive under these conditions. Secondly, as much as we've been looking for life elsewhere in the universe, we really haven't looked that much at all. We've only been searching for a couple of decades, and there are still significant limitations to what we can and can't see out there. And that's assuming that we're looking in the right place at the right time and in the right way. In order to communicate with some alien civilization on some distant planet, we would have to send a signal in just the right direction. That signal would have to travel for several years, maybe several thousands of years, before it got to another star system. If there's life there, it would have had to have evolved intelligence like ours, and be technologically advanced enough to build a radio receiver, and have built a radio receiver, and be listening at the right frequency at the right time in the right direction when our signal comes in, and be smart enough to be able to decode it, and be interested in decoding it in the first place, and want to write back to us, and then actually go about writing back to us, and also build a radio transmitter that's powerful enough to get all the way back to Earth, and send that message in the right direction at the right time, so that however many thousands of years later it gets to us, and then we have to still be here, and have the technology to receive that signal, and have that technology built and turned on and listening in the right direction at the right time, and want to hear it and want to decode it. Like, there's so many variables here, it is not a likely scenario. For all we know, there could be countless planets out there that are teeming with life, and none of them own a radio, so we just don't know. To conclude that there's no life elsewhere in the universe just because we haven't found it yet is like, as Neil deGrasse Tyson said, walking up to the edge of the ocean, scooping out a cup of water, and concluding that there's no whales in the ocean because you didn't find any in your 1-cup sample. Finally, if you think that Phil's argument thus far is in any way compelling, just try this thought experiment. What if we did find life elsewhere in the universe? What if we found that the universe was bristling with life? Or what if we even just found one other planet with life? Would you still think that this planet was perfectly fine-tuned for us? Would you still think that we were that special in all of our mundanity? If not, then I encourage you to look into the actual probability that there is life elsewhere in the universe and start asking yourself why so many astrophysicists and astronomers are convinced that we can't possibly be the only life out here, and see what that does to your worldview. And if so, then you really need to stop acting like this argument means anything, because it clearly doesn't.
Now, you start reading through Genesis, and you get to Genesis 11, which is become part of what I'm going to say here. Genesis 11, verse 1. The whole world had one language and a common speech. It answers a lot of questions the atheists have because they scratch their head because you know what they want to know, Al?
So,
where did all these languages come from?
mm-hmm.
I don't believe God made it. I believe humanity crawled out of the ocean. Well, if they crawl out of the ocean, I guess the ocean, for some reason or another, it made everybody to speak in one language.
I'm going to be honest right now. I have no idea what Phil is getting at there. I'm almost certainly going to have to cut that clip down because it's really long and you can't have more than 30 seconds of somebody else's video unedited without risking a copyright claim. But I promise I'm not going to take out anything that changes the meaning of what Phil is saying here. You can go watch the original clip and make sure that I did not misrepresent him or misinterpret him or anything like that. He just went straight from there's no life anywhere else in the universe to the Bible says that we all spoke one language at one time, to atheists don't know where different languages come from, and then he landed on, if you believe that humans came from the ocean, you must also assume that the ocean made us to speak one language. What? Like, I don't know if he knows that linguistics, the study of languages and where they come from, exists, or if he's claiming to have a concrete answer, whereas we are still doing research. I don't know if he thinks that the theory of evolution claims that human beings literally came out of the ocean, or if he's deliberately oversimplifying his understanding of evolution in order to make a more effective point. I don't know how any of this relates to the existence of life elsewhere in the universe, or the angle and the speed of the Earth, which is where we started. And because I don't know any of that, I feel like it's probably important to point out that the field of anthropology is divided up in different ways in different countries, but here in the US, it's divided into 4 subfields, which are biological anthropology, cultural anthropology, archaeology, and linguistics. Linguistics, again, being the study of the evolution of languages. I know several linguists. I've studied under a couple of linguists. I have never, ever met a linguist who claims that human language came from the ocean. It was such a curveball out of nowhere. And now I feel like I have no idea what's going on.
But you get to Genesis 11 and a strange thing happens. As men moved eastward, they found, this is after the flood. And these are descendants of Noah's sons that came off the boat. From these, the nations spread out over the earth after the flood. That comes before the Tower of Babel.
So after all that buildup, we finally see what Phil is talking about here. It's the Tower of Babel, the original tall tale on the origin of different languages.
The whole world had one speech. As men moved eastward and found a plain in Shinar and settled there, they said to each other, give us some bricks and let's build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens. And we'll make a name for ourselves and not be scattered over the face of the whole earth. We got this one language. We want to keep that. We don't want to move. We want to stay right here and show everybody how great we are.
Who would they be showing if they were all the people in the world? Who would they be showing? It says that they're all the people, and they all live in one place, and they all speak one language. So why do they need to make a name for themselves? Who are they trying to impress?
But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower that the men were building, and the Lord said, as one people, speaking the same language, they have begun to do this, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. Come, let us go down. This is God. Come, let us go down, verse 7, and confuse their language so they will not understand each other.
So I just looked this story up online because I wanted to understand why people think that a god would do this. And I found a bunch of explanations about how the people of the time were trying to reach God, or they were trying to usurp him, or that they wanted to make themselves safe from another flood, or that they needed to be punished for their hubris or something. But none of that is what the actual book says. The whole story is just 9 verses long. It's really short, and it's exactly what Phil just read. The people wanted to build a tower to reach heaven, and God said they are united and they have one language. And because of that, they can do anything they want. Nothing will ever be impossible for them. So he went down and he messed up their languages, and then he scattered them all over the world. That's the whole story. They had heightened ambition and a building sense of unity. But in the end, their plans just didn't stack up.
A new record!
So in the end, this isn't a case against evolution, or atheism, or for intelligent design, or creationism, or anything like that. It's just a story about a God who was so threatened and upset by human solidarity and progress that he deliberately made it harder for us to communicate with each other and spread us out so that we couldn't accomplish great things. Slavers and union busters use the same tactics, but it does raise several questions. For example, if these were all the people in the world and they all lived in one place and that's where all the languages came from, why can't we trace all of the languages of the world back to that one place? Why isn't there one particular region in the east where this tower supposedly was with any records whatsoever of several languages suddenly coming into existence and coexisting for any length of time at all? And if these weren't all the people in the world and actually a bunch of them went this way and a bunch of them went that way and there was just this group of people that tried to build this tower, then why don't we find a bunch of languages originating from that region and then everybody else all speaking the same language all over the rest of the world? Unless everybody else's languages also got mixed up, in which case, why if they didn't build the tower? How do you explain the observable phenomenon of languages changing over time if this is where all languages came from? If English was created at the Tower of Babel, then why does it look so different just a couple of hundred or even 1,000 years ago? Why aren't you currently using words like thine and thou? How big could they have possibly made this tower with just bricks? Like, I'm no engineer, but I'm pretty sure that before we started using steel frames, the tallest buildings were only like a dozen or so stories tall. So how on earth could they have made a tower to the heavens using just clay bricks? Like, why didn't God just let physics handle the situation? A strong wind would have knocked that tower over in no time. And it's not like he cares about people getting hurt. Just 4 chapters before this story, God said that he regretted having ever made humanity, and then he drowned every living thing in the world. The Great Pyramid in Giza, if you were to break it up into stories, would be about 45 stories tall. And it was as ancient to the people who wrote the Bible as the Bible is to us. It's from about 2500 BCE. Was the Tower of Babel taller than the pyramids? If so, how? And if not, why didn't the Egyptians have their language confounded? Even if God had just allowed them to build an absurdly large tower, what's the worst that would have happened? They got to space and then they died up there? Like, what's the actual problem here? Phil himself mentioned that we've sent rovers and stuff to Mars, so are we to assume that these people could have built a tower as far as Mars without any consequence? Where did they get the materials? What's the point of confounding our languages anyway? Isn't that unnecessarily complicated? In the next book, he speaks to a man through a burning bush. Couldn't he have just turned up here in the form of some other luminescent plant and told people to quit stacking bricks? Answers in Genesis says that the Tower of Babel event took place 4,200 years ago. But we have writing in cuneiform, proto-cuneiform, and hieroglyphics from hundreds of years before that. So how did those different languages exist before different languages existed? There are presently over 7,000 languages in the world. That means, at the most conservative estimate, there would have to have been at least 14,000 people present at the Tower of Babel for them to pair up and pass on their new language to their offspring. According to Answers in Genesis, this event occurred about 100 years after the flood. So how did the 8 people who survived on the ark produce 14,000 new people in the span of about one human lifetime? The tallest building around today is the Burj Khalifa. It has 163 stories and it stands just under 3,000 feet tall. Why isn't their language being confounded? That leads me to assume that the Tower of Babel must have been taller than the Burj Khalifa is. And they didn't have elevators back then. How crazy were these people's calf muscles walking up that many stairs to build the tower? God must have been more afraid of their legs than their language.
It's the beginning of all the dialects that you see that humanity has, and there's a lot of them. I don't know how many dialects, but somebody would know that.
As I said before, there are over 7,000 languages in the world. Dialects? I don't even know how to begin calculating that. There are over 100 different dialects of English alone, but that's easily explainable. The origins of speech go back almost 2 million years. Homo erectus had all the right equipment for speech, and based on their technological and exploratory achievements, they almost certainly had some sort of spoken language, even if it was a very simple one. What we know for sure is that over the past few tens of thousands of years, the languages spoken throughout the world have branched and diversified away from each other in the exact same way that they do today, with each generation adding slight modifications. For most of human history, nobody had rapid forms of communication, which means over time, with everybody changing their dialect just a little bit, the Latin spoken in this region and the Latin spoken in this region became so indistinguishable from one another that eventually we just started calling this one French and calling this one Spanish. The dialects became new languages. And again, this is an active area of academic study. Linguists have been able to track all human languages back to a few major roots, but they've yet to been able to find one single language that all of humanity spoke at one time. And it's possible that no such language ever existed, but that language is invented multiple times by different populations and it grew from there. But what isn't helpful to anybody is to assume that a story that we have no evidence for is a better explanation than the things that we do have evidence for, which also happen to contradict your story.
And you say all these different dialects, what's the point here? Well, you go from there, that's where all the languages came from, because think about it, if you're an atheist, you say, well, when saltwater made them, he made all of them speaking the same language, but God stepped in, and now you have how many? Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of different languages.
And just like that, the clip ends just as abruptly as it began. I have no idea why they chose to cut it like that. It ends in the middle of a thought. It started in the middle of a sentence. And it only really covers one argument, which is the fine-tuning argument, which is a terrible argument. Also, to address what he said at the very end there, why would I, as an atheist, assume that God had divided up our languages? Even if I didn't know where different languages came from, what's the logic there? He said, if you're an atheist, you think that salt water made us to all speak one language, but then God stepped in and divided up our languages. Why would an atheist think that? Why would anyone think that? Perhaps Phil's point about the Tower of Babel there was just lost in translation.
Hey everybody, thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to smash that like button and hit subscribe for more great content.
Overall, I give this clip a science teacher challenge level 1 out of 10. It's something that you would have to already believe in the Bible in order to resonate with. If you take it as an actual scientific challenge, it's barely worth the breath that it took to articulate it. And if you take it as a philosophical challenge, it simply doesn't hold any water logically or morally. Like the ethos, pathos, and logos are all virtually non-existent here. It's not so much that there isn't a good argument against this, it's that there isn't really anything there to argue against. To me, just based on the way that this video was structured and presented, this sounds like something that maybe Phil heard at church and is now attempting to regurgitate on his own, leaving out several important details along the way. This does not sound like anybody who's ever actually spoken to an atheist, let alone anybody who can actually explain how evolution works. It's just something that makes sense to him, presented in a way that makes sense to him, about a topic that makes sense to him, without any regard as to whether or not it makes sense to anybody else. Pro tip from somebody who does this for a living: if you're trying to teach something without any concern for how or if your presentation is going to resonate with your audience, especially audiences of different backgrounds that you're trying to reach out to, you're probably not going to get very far with that lesson. And when you're as famous as Phil Robertson is, with as many resources as Phil Robertson has, there really just is no excuse for that kind of narrow-mindedness besides just laziness or lack of concern. Just everything about this video screams that this man does not actually care about convincing his atheist friends. He cares about preaching to his platform. But by framing this as some sort of an outreach to the atheist crowd, he can drive up his views, rile up his base, and try to rebrand a half-thought-out sermon as some sort of carefully crafted debate. In summary, if you're a creationist, don't be like Phil. Also, don't be a creationist. And with that, I'm Forrest Valkai. Thank you so much for watching, liking, commenting, subscribing, and all the other stuff you do here on YouTube. Please exit through the gift shop on your way out, pick up one of these sweet t-shirts. Have an awesome rest of your day, and never stop learning. Bye-bye!
Bum, 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 ba-dum, ba-dum. A duck walked up to a lemonade stand, and he said to the man, run in the stand.
Sweetness is what you should have called it.